Okay, so I'm Matt Fisher. I'm a software engineer at National Snow and Ice Data Center. And I've been a NASA Openscapes mentor team member since mid to late 2023. And I'm excited to talk about psychological safety because I've been on some teams of varying effectiveness and comfort. And I wanted to understand what was going on those teams and replicate successes. Over time, I kind of found psychological safety to be an effective explanatory layer for that. Um, and I feel really privileged to be teaching this lesson. Sorry about the thing not full screening. I'm kind of a beginner on this, but Tara Robertson, a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant who helped form this program, kind of laid all this groundwork for me, and I'm just kind of updating it and spinning it a little bit. And all of this is also based on foundational work by Dr. Amy Edmondson, professor at Harvard Business School. And just as a reminder, there are some bonus slides at the end. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is what is psychological safety. We're going to define it. We're going to talk about why it's important or even critical for effective teams. And we're going to discuss actions you can take to boost psychological safety on your team. Oh, and by the way, can someone make sure that there's a link to these slides in the doc, please? Okay, so what is psychological safety? Amy Edmondson has a couple of definitions here from a 1999 study. But to me, a paraphrasing that I really like is feeling confident that I'm not going to face punishment or humiliation by my colleagues for taking interpersonal risks like pointing out mistakes, sharing a wild idea, or asking a question that I think might be perceived as dumb. I think it's important to clarify that psychological safety is not about avoiding conflict or being too nice. It's not about walking on eggshells or avoiding giving negative feedback. Withholding feedback is not kind. And we want folks to feel safe giving constructive criticism so our team can be a success. So it's about kind and honest communication. Some examples from healthcare. This was an example that Dr. Edmondson used in her TED Talk. A nurse notices what looks like a dosage mistake, but they aren't certain. Do they call an on-call doctor and double check? How do their prior interactions with that doctor factor into that decision about whether to make that call? Maybe that doctor has criticized the nurse's competence in the past. The second example here is a more recent one. There have been quality issues with Boeing aircraft. And there's, if you click the link there that says aviation, there's a Forbes article that points to psychological safety as being a potential cause where line workers don't feel comfortable raising issues that they see up the chain. So why is psychological safety important? There are risks if you don't have a psychologically safe environment. This diagram or table is from Dr. Amy Edmondson's TED Talk. And she used the term easy in the right column, but I think a better word there is natural or maybe automatic. These types of avoidant behaviors are natural in response to an environment that you perceive as dangerous. So if you don't want to look ignorant in front of your peers, you can just not ask questions. But those things can have negative impacts on our work and the people we care about. So tangibly, maybe a project could fail or underwhelm if certain questions or ideas aren't raised in a certain time frame. Or worse, people could get hurt, for example, in dangerous field situations. This is another graphic from Dr. Edmondson's TEDx talk, where she points out that psychological safety and accountability are independent variables. And she compares accountability to the gas pedal on a car and lack of psychological safety to the brake pedal. But I think largely we're all on the right side of this chart. We have high accountability and we have complex work. So I think that's where we live and that's where we're going to focus. I think it's kind of a common experience to feel uncomfortable speaking up in certain environments. And I can remember a time when I felt like I was in this anxiety zone on the lower right-hand corner of the chart because I'd worked really hard on a problem in my free time that was kind of widely agreed upon by my peers to be a problem. But then when I shared that project with the same group, I was kind of challenged or confronted about having worked on that project without getting approval, even though it was on my free time. And it was kind of something I was like really jazzed about. And took a lot of my energy to continue working on that project out of me. And Dr. Edmondson also emphasizes that this anxiety zone is where like the dangerous stuff can happen, because somebody could see something really bad, some potential for harm or disaster on the horizon and not say anything. And in her gas pedal, brake paddle analogy, you could think of that as driving a car really unsafely by pressing on the brakes and the gas at the same time. And you may also be currently experiencing or have positive memories of a team that you thought of as this kind of learning zone. To me, when I was on teams like that, it kind of felt like the team had a magic sauce that enabled us to communicate freely, not be defensive or feel intimidated, have fun and do our best work. And I felt like the investment that went into creating that environment was very small, but the payoff was enormous. And just to tie up my earlier anecdote about sharing some free time work that I did, I reshared that work within the Openscapes community. And not only did I get a really supportive response from that community, I gained a collaborator on that project and a new friend. So happy ending. Okay, now we're going to talk about actions to boost psychological safety on your team. They fall into three categories: avoid behaviors that punish risk-taking, encourage risk-taking, and acknowledge when we make mistakes. And for example, a common one is to accidentally punish someone for taking a risk, either directly or indirectly. So we'll look at that a little bit. One way I think that often happens is text communication doesn't effectively communicate our tone or our body language like in-person communication does. So I'm saying emojis and other media are important elements of quality professional communication. And this is not my idea. This comes from a 2014 article called 15 Rules for Communication at GitHub. And maybe this is your reaction to hearing this, because I think a lot of people think emojis are a little childish. But I think also most of us kind of feel intuitively that the words we use are only a small part of understanding each other. And for example, there's a kind of common rule of thumb called the 7-38-55 rule, which says our communication or our meaning is 7% words, 38% tone, and 55% body language. And that's not, a well-supported number, I think, but I think that's used commonly in like marketing training. So an example of that might be the words "we need to talk." I think it's commonly understood that those are scary words to use. And when I see words like that, my heart beat a little bit faster. But you can just add an emoji to that. And now suddenly there's some meaning here that clarifies that the thing we need to talk about is something exciting and fun, not something scary. And then to encourage risk-taking, it's important to frame our work as a learning problem and not an execution problem. So asking questions like, what can we learn from this? And avoiding saying things like thinking that our work is not going the way we want it to because we're doing a bad job, rather because we haven't learned the right lessons. Also, modeling curiosity is important, asking lots of questions. The link on this slide shows some ways to take some closed-ended questions and make them more open-ended. It's also important to remember that it takes time and consistency to build trust. It's okay to repeat yourself. So you may be saying things like all ideas are valuable or there are no stupid questions a lot. And finally, it's important to acknowledge our mistakes and our fallibility. So ask questions like, what am I missing? And what haven't I considered? Okay, so those are the actions. Avoid behaviors that punish risk-taking, encourage risk-taking, and acknowledge when we make mistakes. And that's all I got. Thanks for your time. We're going to do a brief exercise now. I think it's going to be a silent journaling exercise. And here's the prompt. I think the prompt is also in the document. But we'd like you to think about what's something that you or someone else has done on a team to make it more psychologically safe to speak up with a wildly creative idea, point out a problem, or something else.